Steve Jobs was like a real dyed-in-the-wool hippie. Didn't like to wear shoes. He was vegetarian, very into commune life and all that. So didn't wash too much.
And we were friends because of Eastern literature. We went to India together. We had gone up to this apple orchard farm.
He was involved in a commune up there. And that was all a big part of his life and his values.
Steve came in here wearing torn jeans and everything. And my mother-in-law, who was there, you know, she says, "You're not coming to my booth, your ass sticking out." Nobody could believe that this little computer, a single board, could do all that.
They came in a package that I would describe like a pizza box. You know, it was a flat carton, and there was a PC board in there, and that was it.
They both wanted to do something really, really great.
I ended up writing the business plan because neither of the two Steves had a knack for that and didn't want to do it.
Two of us would have a company of our own. Didn't matter if we lost money. Didn't have to make a profit. We were doing it for the fun.
People say, well, how did you manage to manage him? And I said, well, it's not difficult. Just make sure you give him important things to do and plenty of it.
Well, Steve has a very unusual management style.
He would walk around and see what people were doing. He'd say, "That's good, but is that the best you can do?"
He'd say, "Oh, that stinks, that's horrible." Or sometimes he'd say, "Oh, that's great, that's incredibly great."
He was, in those days, not the highly predictable executive that he later became.
You'd never want to work for this guy. He's the kind of guy that if you meet him in an elevator at Apple Computer, by the time that elevator gets to the floor, you're fired if you say the wrong thing.
The Macintosh was envisioned by Steve as the first truly creative tool that was built on personal computer technology.
Just a month or two before we were launching the Macintosh, Microsoft announced the first version of Windows.
I personally saw many, many thousands of lines of code that had been written at Apple that were included in the Microsoft OS. You know, did he steal them? I know he didn't write them.
Mac didn't take off immediately. It was, what would we say, a critical success, but the sales were not there. Steve Jobs ultimately paid a price for that.
Halfway through the meeting, Steve got so upset he started crying, and I knew at that moment that John Scully had him. I knew at that moment that Scully was going to go back to the board and say, "This guy is unstable," which he did.
You are still chairman of the board. You're still the largest shareholder, but you are no longer in charge of the Macintosh division.
When Jobs first resigned and left the company, there were people, literally grown men, crying.
His idea of taking the company public on almost nothing but the promise of Toy Story was brilliant. And he became an overnight billionaire from that.
Steve, you know, clearly has a talent for looking for markets ready for innovation. And that was clearly the case with music.
Steve Jobs was incredibly prescient, or he was incredibly lucky, or a little of both.
No one else in Silicon Valley or anywhere else in the world was thinking about computers the way Steve Jobs was.
Where Steve Jobs placed himself in 1984 is where the world, 30 years later, has finally ended up.
I think technology is going on this course over the past few decades from something that only geeks to something that is like actually really, really cool, and as cool as rock stars were in the 60s.